All right, so Ron DeSantis, the far-right fascist governor of Florida with potential 2024 presidential ambitions, is back at it again, doing what he does best and suppressing what the American people within the state of Florida are able to learn within our schools. And so this one is specifically centering around them banning a new proposed AP African American Studies course, as it says up here in the headline. But obviously this is coming amidst a widespread across the country reactionary backlash against LGBTQ rights, against abortion rights, against teaching even accurate portrayals of American history, specifically related to the legacy of slavery and the Jim Crow era and other unresolved racial issues in this country. Ron DeSantis simply doesn't want our kids to learn about this so that they can, I guess, instead just replace it with full-blown, right-wing nationalist patriotic education. So here from CNN, they give us a little bit of details. They say, Florida rejected a proposed advanced placement course focused on African American studies because it included study of topics like the movement for Black lives, Black feminism, and reparations, according to a list of concerns provided to CNN on Friday by Republican Governor Ron DeSantis' office. Okay, so this is directly from his office, right? This is not some bad faith interpretation of, what they actually have a problem with here. They themselves are listing that they have a problem with the teaching of the movement for Black lives, Black feminism, and reparations. Okay, so they continue. They say the one-page document prepared by the Florida Department of Education also questions the inclusion of certain Black authors and historians whose writings touch on critical race theory and Black communism. I mean, first of all, the notion that critical race theory is something that is widely being taught to young kids in our schools is just not true. Republicans, conservatives, reactionaries have basically just spun this term, critical race theory, which actually has a specific definition within an academic context, and they basically have just twisted it to mean any teaching about the ongoing structural racial issues in this country, or the history and the legacy of those things that I just mentioned. So this is basically an all-encompassing term here, critical race theory, in the same way that the term woke has basically just come to be defined by anything that conservatives happen to dislike. But they're banning Black authors, historians who talk about critical race theory and Black communism, which even if you have an issue with, the history of communism throughout Black movements in the United States, that's still something that you should learn about, right? That's not something you just ban because you ideologically disagree with their positions. I mean, we still learn about the KKK, for example, even though I think a wide swath of the American people would say that they were abhorrent and terrible and essentially just domestic terrorists in the United States, specifically targeting Black people. But you still learn about them because it's important to learn about those historical things, right? You don't just ditch everything because you say, oh my god, well, this is commie propaganda for people to be learning about this in any way, shape, or form in any context. But they say, for example, the state objects to the inclusion of writings by Robin D.G. Kelly, a professor of American history at UCLA, who, quote, warns that simply establishing safe spaces and renaming campus buildings does nothing to overthrow capitalism, according to the document. Absolutely based and correct take there from this professor at UCLA. I mean, number one, he's obviously correct here. And number two, I would think that this would be something that would almost at least partially appeal to some conservatives, right? Because he's pointing out here that having safe spaces on campus, or just renaming some building on campus to be the MLK library or something like that, right? That doesn't actually address the, underlying core economic and political issues in this country related to race. It's basically just virtue signaling, right? It's the same thing as the DC mayor, having a couple streets renamed Black Lives Matter Boulevard and painting the big letters on the street during the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement, but then turning around and giving a bunch more funding to those very same police who have been brutalizing Black communities in the United States. So it's just hollow virtue signaling, and that's what he's calling out there. But still they have a problem with that because I guess he mentions overthrowing capitalism, which again would be an absolutely based and correct thing to do, and we should be teaching our children about those types of opinions. But they say that the state also said that the course framework for the study of reparations, the argument to compensate Black Americans for slavery and other historical atrocities and oppressive acts, includes, quote, no critical perspective or balancing opinion in this lesson. Okay, so they have a problem that there's no balanced, alternate sort of conflicting perspective that's being given on the issue of reparations for slavery and other historical atrocities. I mean, they just don't want people to learn about this unless you're giving some sort of a false equivalency. I mean, again, would you apply the same standard pander to like the KKK, for example? I mean, once again, would you demand that, like, oh, well, we're teaching about the KKK, who were objectively bad by anybody with any, moral compass in any way, shape, or form, right? Who were objectively bad? Do we have to give alternate opinions on that and say, like, well, some people say that the KKK was horrible and racist and, terrorizing black communities, and other people say that, it's just part of their historical heritage or something like that, right? Are you saying we need balanced opinions on everything? I mean, black reparations, you could definitely have some disagreements, good faith disagreements about, like, okay, what does that actually mean? How do you identify people who have been harmed by the legacy of slavery or the Jim Crow era in this country? How are you going to go about dispersing payments or, making investments in certain things, right? There's disagreement and nuanced discussions about how to go about doing that, but just what do what is your actual underlying problem here? Do you want them to say that, like, well, a lot of people say that black people aren't suppressed or oppressed in this country, and, the legacy of these things has no impact on modern society because we magically moved to a post-race society or something like that? I mean, like, what is the actual detailed, critique here that you have of people learning about these historical atrocities and possible remedies to address the lingering issues from those very things? But they have another quote here saying that all points and resources in this study advocate for reparations. Okay, so I mean, again, a little bit of clarification there, right? They just want people to advocate against reparations as well as a part of these studies. I mean, they're just coming out and saying the quiet part out loud, I guess, but they continue saying a previous draft version of the concerns sent to CNN by Ron DeSantis' office included an objection to the study of, quote, the Black Power movement and the Black Panther Party. Okay, they have a problem with teaching about the Black Panther Party, right? They say the draft version asserted that the Black Panther Party was based on the ideology of Marxism-Leninism. Okay, somewhat true there, and also based and correct. Good for them, right? No opposition here whatsoever that I could possibly see, but they say that the goal of the Black Panther Party was to fundamentally change or overthrow the American government. What the fuck is wrong with that? To fundamentally change the American government? We're not allowed to teach about an organization like the Black Panther Party because they wanted to change the American government? I mean, that's the objection here. So unless you are perfectly falling in line with the status quo, and unless you are perfectly willing to be subservient to the way that our current government is organized right now, then you can't have opinions diverting from that in any way, shape, or form, apparently, right? I mean, how fucking insane is this, right? They say, however, in an updated version of the state's concerns, the references to the Black Panther Party were removed and replaced with an objection to the study of black queer studies. I mean, again, this is not about, teaching our kids accurate history or, trying to be neutral on some controversial issues or anything like that, or giving both sides to nuanced topics or something like that, right? This is literally just about suppressing the legacy and the history of, racism and structural issues related to racism in this country, slavery, the Jim Crow era. It's about suppressing any knowledge or awareness that LGBTQ people exist and that they should be treated with the dignity and respect that they deserve and as fellow human beings. They basically just want to remove that from the discussion because they're, I guess, scared that some people are going to learn about the Black Panther Party and maybe come out the other side thinking that they, had some good points that they were making, which honestly anybody who looks into the Black Panther Party probably will, but, they don't want that to be included. And I think that's for obvious reasons, right? They don't want to teach that there are potential alternatives to how we have organized our society, potential alternatives to the capitalist mode of production, or potential alternatives to the way that we have constructed our massively corrupted political system here in the United States. But they continue saying that the State Department of Education on January 12th informed the College Board, the organization that oversees the advanced placement program, that the course violated state law and rejected its inclusion in Florida schools. And the course, which is the first of its kind, was first introduced in the fall as a pilot in about 60 schools and will be offered nationwide starting in the 2024-25 school year. So, I mean, I guess hopefully this will be taught in some states, I guess, not conservative ones, but they say it was developed over the last decade and is intended to be a multidisciplinary study of the African American diaspora that includes literature, the arts, science, politics, and geography. So it's a widely spread course, right? This isn't just a course that's like, here's why Marxist-Leninism is absolutely based and you should all follow that ideology, right? It's a massive course that we're talking about, and they're talking about just completely banning it in the state of Florida because what? They reference the Black Panther Party in a discussion about black history throughout the United States and the, African diaspora around the world. I mean, what are we really talking about here? This is just talking about objective history, and they finish off here, okay? They say DeSantis's office said that the state would reconsider the decision if the course is changed to comply with Florida law. So again, what does that even mean? I mean, unless you comply with our laws on what? That we're going to have to teach a study and advanced placement course on the history of the African diaspora, and you're not allowed to talk about the Black Panther Party. You're not allowed to talk about any, I guess, even potentially controversial historical Black figures who have had opinions on socialism or Marxism or communism for that matter. I mean, it seems like that's what they're saying here, right? You can't talk about oppression. You can't talk about the legacy of, Jim Crow and slavery in an honest way, in an objective way, without potentially being banned by this governor in Florida. But they finish here saying that under DeSantis, whose standing among conservatives has soared nationwide, and I mean, obviously, this guy's going to probably at least run for president in 2024, so he wants to sort of boost his cred with reactionary conservatives across the country, right? I don't even think necessarily that, like, oh, this specifically is part of his, like, grand ideological plan. I think this is him just throwing red meat to his base, who also don't want these things to be taught in our public schools. But I mean, maybe he does obviously to some degree believe in these things ideologically. I think he's much more of an ideological actor than somebody like Donald Trump, who is just very brazenly and openly only acting in his self-interest. But they say that his support has soared nationwide following his public stances on hot-button cultural issues, and who is said to be weighing a potential 2024 bid. And the state has banned the teaching of critical race theory, and last year it moved to prohibit instruction that suggests anyone is privileged or oppressed based on their race or skin color. Okay? You are literally not allowed to teach about structural racism. That's it. That's his definition, right? Okay? They are banning, it's not just like critical race theory through the academic lens of analysis being taught to like kindergartners or something like that, and saying, oh, well, these sensitive discussions might be out of their, field of understanding, right? It's not talking about that. It's literally just saying that they are prohibiting instruction that even suggests that anyone is privileged or oppressed based on their race or skin color. So again, just completely whitewashing over the entire history and ongoing legacy of structural racism in the United States. And again, it's not even just Ron DeSantis. This is something that has been going on across the entire country in state legislatures here in America. They say more than 1,600 books were banned during the 2021-2022 school year, report finds. 1,600 books banned. And again, disproportionately, these are going to be books about, Black history. These are going to be books about the history of the LGBTQ liberation movements and all of that. That's what this is centering around. They just want to shut that off from society, which, especially with the LGBTQ issues, ties into a broader point of how they basically also just don't want LGBTQ people to exist in the same way they don't want kids to learn about the existence of LGBTQ people. They don't want them to exist within society. And what I mean by that is that you look at, especially with, trans people in America, you look at all of these policies that conservative state legislatures across the country have been pushing. I mean, forcing detransition on trans people, banning the existence of trans young people as well, even though they objectively have existed for the entirety of human existence as we understand it, but banning gender affirming care, and even going so far as to like separate trans kids from their parents if their parents move forward with any sort of type of social or gender transitioning in that way. And so I mean, these are just like full-blown authoritarians. I mean, these are just full-blown fascist policies that these conservatives are diving headfirst into, and again, just using these scapegoats within society, whether it's Black people or immigrants or gay and trans people or anything like that, using these scapegoats within our society to distract from the fact that their foreign policy agenda serves the elites within this country and is absolutely obliterating average working class people. I mean, it's a demented strategy, but it's obviously been somewhat effective, at least to some degree. Now, you can make an argument that maybe people weren't as on board the transphobic hype train going into the 2022 midterm elections because conservatives focused heavily on that, and it doesn't seem like it paid off for them politically, but that is not going to stop them, because the most rabid right-wing supporters within the Republican Party, they eat this shit up, and so this is going to continue. And you have that famous, I think it was Martin Luther King quote where he talks about the arc of the universe bending towards justice and morality and all of that, and it's like, this is an instance where it seems like we are certainly backsliding, at least to some degree. But I'll finish off here just with a clarification, officially, explicitly here from Ron DeSantis and his team on what exactly they mean by terms like critical race theory or woke, which pretty much at this point could just be interchangeable from their perspective. But here from the Washington Post, I talked about this in a different video previously, but just as a reminder, they say, what does woke mean? mean whatever Ron DeSantis wants. So they say that Gray Rohrer of the news outlet Florida Politics was in the courtroom last week as staffers for Ron DeSantis were asked an interesting question. What does woke mean? And the federal court in Tallahassee, where the question came up, doesn't allow for recordings, he told the Washington Post, but he jotted down the responses that they offered. So they say Ryan Newman, DeSantis's general counsel, so the guy who's defending a lot of his policies in these court proceedings, said that the term referred to, quote, the belief that there are systemic injustices in American society and that we need to address them. Okay, again, the belief that there are systemic injustices. First of all, that's not a belief, that is a objective fact that you're referencing there, okay? The belief that there are systemic injustices in American society and that we need to address them. So basically, like, if you want to improve society, if you want to improve our economy and make it more fair and just, if you want to address, again, the history and legacy of racial issues in this country, if you want to just improve society or this country in any way, shape, or form, cut it off. Banned. Not allowed. They say that Taryn Fenske, DeSantis' communications director, said that woke was a slang term for progressive activism, adding that the term also referred to a belief that there were systemic injustices in the United States. Okay, so I mean, again, I'm not being hyperbolic here when I say that that is their goal. They literally do not want young people to be able to learn anything outside of just a full-blown right-wing nationalist, pro-capitalist education curriculum. That's it. That's all they want kids to learn. They don't want to talk about the LGBTQ community and even their existence at a fundamental level, or the fact that we should be accepting and respecting of those various communities here in the United States and maybe enable them to have equal rights as the rest of us. They don't want to talk about the legacy of Jim Crow and slavery and ongoing economic injustices that Black Americans have faced, or police brutality, or any of these other, the prison industrial complex, any of these other issues as well that go in tandem with that. They just want to completely blank that out. And the MLK quote that conservatives pretty much always bring up at this point whenever they're having a conversation or bringing up Martin Luther King Jr. himself is, a pretty good interpretation, or a pretty good example of exactly how they view the current status of the United States of America. So they constantly bring up this MLK quote that they take completely out of context and misinterpret it wildly, but basically they try to argue that, oh, well, MLK wasn't saying that we need some radical, economic revolution or, a political revolution in this country to grant, just equal rights for Black people. He was saying that when he said that I want to live in a world where people are judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin, they will use that quote and take it completely out of context and basically mean it, or claim that he is meaning that we move to a post-race world, right? That now the only racism that exists is like one individual racist white person who says the N-word someday or something like that, right? They want to take Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy completely out of context, and the fact that he was a democratic socialist who was fighting for not just racial justice but also economic justice at the forefront of the things that he was talking about when he was killed. But they take these things out of context because they don't want to have those honest conversations, because they don't want to go about actually addressing the core issues and the core rot that still exists in this country.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying